Water is the most innocent thing in the world. It has no calories, no additives, no side effects that anyone ever warns you about. You have been drinking it your entire life without giving it a second thought, and that is precisely why what I am about to tell you is going to land so differently than almost anything you have heard about health in a long time. Because the danger here is not in the water itself, it is in the way most people over 60 are drinking it. The timing, the volume in each sitting, the pattern that has become so automatic, so unremarkable, so deeply assumed to be harmless that questioning it feels almost absurd. And yet the research on what happens to the aging cardiovascular system when water is consumed in the wrong pattern is clear enough, specific enough, and consequential enough that cardiologists and nephrologists who understand the mechanism think about it constantly, while most of the people whose hearts it is affecting have never heard it mentioned once. Here is what makes this so quietly serious. The heart after 60 is not the heart of 40. The walls of the cardiac chambers have changed. The left ventricle, the primary pumping chamber that pushes blood out into the arteries, has stiffened. Its ability to relax and fill between beats, a function called diastolic compliance, has diminished. In a young, flexible heart, the left ventricle fills easily and completely with each heartbeat because the chamber walls are supple and yielding. But in an aging heart, particularly one affected by decades of mild hypertension or metabolic strain, or simply the structural changes that come with time, the ventricle is less compliant. It fills more slowly and less completely, and it is far more sensitive to sudden volume changes in the bloodstream than it was 20 or 30 years ago. When the volume of fluid circulating in the system rises too quickly, the aging heart must work harder, faster, and under greater pressure to manage what a younger heart would handle without effort. And the way most people drink water after 60 is creating exactly these sudden volume changes, repeatedly, every day, in hearts that are progressively less equipped to absorb them gracefully. This is the conversation that Dr. Victor Lang has built this channel to make accessible, and if this is the kind of health clarity you have been searching for, hit like and subscribe right now. Because what you learned today about water and the aging heart is the kind of specific, actionable understanding that belongs in every person over 60's awareness. And right now, most people simply do not have it. Let us start with the specific pattern of drinking that creates the most cardiovascular stress in older adults, because naming the exact behavior changes everything. The behavior is this: drinking large volumes of water rapidly, specifically consuming a large glass of water quickly in the morning immediately upon waking, and repeating large rapid drinking episodes at other points throughout the day, typically when thirst finally signals that dehydration has built up significantly. This pattern, drinking large amounts infrequently and rapidly rather than small amounts consistently and slowly, is the pattern that creates the most dramatic fluid volume shifts in the bloodstream and creates the most cardiovascular demand on an aging heart. The mechanism is direct and measurable. When a large volume of water, typically 16 ounces or more, is consumed rapidly, it is absorbed from the stomach and small intestine into the bloodstream over a relatively short window. Blood plasma volume increases quickly. The kidneys, which regulate blood volume by filtering excess fluid into urine, take time to respond because the renal filtration rate and the hormonal signals governing it operate on a time lag. In a young, well-functioning cardiovascular system, this transient volume increase is handled easily. The heart rate adjusts marginally. The vessel walls accommodate. The kidneys catch up, no net distress. But in an aging cardiovascular system, where the heart's diastolic compliance is already reduced and the vascular walls are stiffer and less adaptable, a sudden increase in circulating blood volume creates a measurable increase in cardiac preload, the filling pressure the heart has to manage on the intake side, and a corresponding increase in afterload, the pressure against which it must push blood out into the arteries. This combination, repeated multiple times a day through large bolus drinking episodes, is a pattern of repeated cardiovascular stress that cardiologists in heart failure management specifically work to prevent in their patients. The particularly dangerous version of this pattern occurs first thing in the morning, and the reason involves a convergence of physiological states that exist only in that specific window after waking. In the hours before and immediately after waking, the sympathetic nervous system is activated as part of the normal cortisol-driven morning arousal response. Heart rate and blood pressure are already rising. Vascular tone is elevated. The cardiovascular system is in a state of heightened adrenergic activity that makes it less compliant and more reactive than it will be later in the day. Adding a large, rapid fluid bolus to this already elevated cardiovascular state amplifies the morning blood pressure and cardiac workload at exactly the time when the statistical risk of cardiovascular events is highest. Research consistently shows that major cardiac events, including heart attacks and sudden cardiac arrhythmias, cluster in the morning hours precisely because the cardiovascular system is at its most reactive and least protected. Creating an additional fluid volume challenge during this window by rapidly drinking a large glass of water immediately upon waking, as so many health advisors recommend, adds a physiological load at the worst possible time. And here is a layer of this story that makes it even more significant. The aging kidney, which is responsible for clearing the excess fluid created by large bolus drinking episodes, is less efficient at this job than it was at 40. Kidney function declines progressively with age in ways we have discussed in other contexts on this channel, and one of the functional consequences is a reduced ability to rapidly excrete excess fluid volume. This means that the transient blood volume increase created by large rapid water consumption persists longer in older adults than in younger ones. The heart has to manage the elevated preload for a longer period before the kidneys restore the baseline, and the combination of reduced cardiac diastolic compliance plus reduced renal fluid clearance plus the morning sympathetic activation creates a cardiovascular environment that is meaningfully more stressful than the same drinking pattern creates in a 40-year-old body. There is a second, equally serious problem with the way most older adults drink water, and it operates in the opposite direction from the large bolus problem. It is the problem of extended dehydration punctuated by large drinking episodes, the direct consequence of the blunted thirst mechanism that accompanies aging. By the time most adults reach their 60s, the hypothalamic thirst response, the biological signal that tells the body to seek water, has become significantly less sensitive than it was in earlier decades. A younger person will begin to feel thirst when body fluid levels drop by roughly 1 to 2%. An older adult may not feel noticeable thirst until fluid levels have dropped by 3 to 4%, a level of dehydration that already has measurable physiological consequences. Blood becomes more viscous. Concentration of dissolved substances in the plasma rises. The work of filtration in the kidneys increases. Blood pressure tends to rise as the body compensates for reduced fluid volume with vascular constriction. And then, when thirst finally signals urgently enough to be acted on, the older adult drinks a large volume rapidly, creating the sudden bolus effect we just described, in a cardiovascular system that is simultaneously in a state of dehydration-induced vascular constriction. The transition from dehydration to rapid rehydration creates a hemodynamic shift that the aging heart manages poorly, and the combination of the two problems, chronic mild dehydration punctuated by large drinking episodes, is more cardiovascularly stressful than either problem in isolation. Let us now talk about what the right pattern looks like, because this is where the information transforms from concern into something genuinely useful. The principle is simple, and the research supports it completely. Small volumes, consistently distributed at regular intervals that do not wait for thirst to signal urgency. The cardiovascular goal is to maintain a relatively stable circulating blood volume throughout the day, rather than cycling through the dehydration to rapid rehydration pattern that creates the largest fluid swings and the largest cardiovascular demands. In practical terms, this means drinking 4 to 6 ounces of water, roughly half a cup, every 30 to 45 minutes throughout the waking hours, rather than saving hydration for 3 or 4 large drinking sessions per day. The morning hydration specifically deserves a targeted adjustment. Rather than drinking a large glass of water immediately upon waking, which creates the worst-case convergence of sympathetic activation and bolus volume load, drink 4 to 6 ounces slowly over the first 15 minutes of waking. This provides the morning rehydration the body genuinely needs after the overnight fasting period, without creating the hemodynamic spike of a large, rapid bolus. Then continue with the small, frequent sipping pattern throughout the morning, rather than waiting for thirst to accumulate into urgency. The temperature of water also matters in the context of the aging cardiovascular system, and this is a detail that most people never encounter in general hydration advice. Very cold water consumed rapidly causes vagal nerve stimulation in some individuals, which can trigger a reflex bradycardia, a slowing of the heart rate, or in susceptible individuals with pre-existing cardiac conduction abnormalities, can provoke arrhythmias. This is particularly relevant in older adults because the prevalence of subclinical cardiac conduction changes increases with age, and the vagal response to cold water in the esophagus is more pronounced in people whose autonomic nervous system regulation has become less finely tuned with age. Drinking room temperature or slightly warm water, particularly in the morning and during periods of physical activity, reduces the vagal stimulation risk and is gentler on the cardiovascular regulatory system. This is not a reason to avoid cold water categorically. It is a reason to be thoughtful about consuming large volumes of very cold water rapidly, particularly in the morning cardiovascular risk window. Sodium is the next piece of this picture that cannot be left out, because water and sodium are managed together by the kidneys and the cardiovascular system in a relationship that is tightly coupled. The kidney regulates blood volume not just by adjusting how much water it excretes, but by adjusting how much sodium it retains or releases, because water follows sodium osmotically throughout the body. When older adults drink large volumes of plain water rapidly, particularly in the context of low sodium intake, they can transiently dilute the sodium concentration in the blood, a condition called dilutional hyponatremia. In mild form, dilutional hyponatremia causes headache, nausea, and confusion. In severe form, it can cause cerebral edema and cardiovascular instability. Older adults are significantly more vulnerable to hyponatremia than younger adults because the kidney's ability to excrete excess free water, the mechanism that protects against dilution, declines with age. People who drink very large total daily volumes of plain water without adequate dietary sodium are running a risk that the standard hydration advice around drinking more water does not adequately account for. The practical implication is not to add salt to everything or to become obsessive about sodium. It is to ensure that significant water drinking, particularly in the larger volumes that wellness culture sometimes promotes, is accompanied by the dietary mineral context that prevents dilutional effects. Eating real food, which provides sodium in naturally balanced forms, throughout the day alongside distributed water intake, prevents the dilution risk that arises from drinking large volumes of plain water in isolation from food intake. And for older adults who exercise in warm conditions and lose significant sodium through sweat, replacing that sodium alongside fluid replacement becomes particularly important for both cardiovascular stability and the prevention of dilutional effects. There is something about the cultural conversation around hydration that deserves to be addressed directly, because it has pushed many well-intentioned people into the large volume, frequent bolus drinking pattern that is most harmful for aging hearts. The recommendation to drink 8 glasses of water a day, which became one of the most pervasive pieces of health advice in the 20th century, is not supported by the specific evidence most people assume it is, and it does not account for the age-related cardiovascular and renal changes that make large volume episodic drinking more problematic after 60 than before. Total daily fluid needs are individual, varying with body size, activity level, climate, dietary moisture content, and health status. Forcing a large daily volume of plain water into a rigid 8-glass framework, consumed in large portions because that is how the goal gets reached without constant small sips, is precisely the pattern that creates the most cardiovascular strain in aging adults. Drinking to the guideline rather than to the physiology is the error, and the physiology changes enough after 60 to make the guideline genuinely insufficient as a guide. The right way to think about hydration after 60 is not in terms of a daily volume target met through large drinking episodes. It is in terms of a steady-state maintenance of circulating blood volume that keeps the cardiovascular system operating in the smooth, stable range where an aging heart performs best and where the kidneys are not repeatedly called upon to rapidly manage large fluid swings. This steady-state maintenance is achieved through small, consistent, regularly timed drinking throughout the day, distributed in a way that prevents both the dehydration that increases blood viscosity and cardiovascular workload in one direction, and the rapid volume loading that increases cardiac preload and afterload in the other. Your heart has been working for you every minute of your life without a single break. Every heartbeat, day and night, over decades, is a gift that most people do not think about until it struggles. And after 60, the way it responds to the fluid environment your kidneys and your drinking habits create for it changes in ways that deserve to be understood and respected rather than ignored. The cardiovascular system does not announce its discomfort loudly or dramatically from the beginning. It adapts, compensates, and works harder until the compensation reaches its limit and the symptoms that were building silently become impossible to ignore. The pattern of how you drink water, something so routine and so apparently benign that it barely registers as a health behavior at all, is one of the inputs shaping that cardiovascular environment every single day. That is the truth that changes how this story ends. Not dramatically, not through sacrifice, through awareness, through a shift in pattern that costs nothing and takes nothing away from the water you drink, only from the way you drink it. Tell me in the comments whether this changed the way you think about something as simple as drinking water, and whether you have experienced any of the symptoms, the morning palpitations, the fatigue after large drinks, the dizziness on standing, that may now make more sense in context. Your experience matters here because what you share in this comment section becomes the next person's education. And please share this video with someone over 60 in your life who has been drinking water the way everyone told them to, without ever being told what the aging cardiovascular system actually needs it to look like. Water is not complicated, but the heart it is flowing through deserves to have its needs understood. Now you do.